Many students have their reasons for going to a certain college, either money-wise, location, or who they know that's going or went there. But for me, the person that inspired me to go was my mother.
My name is Ann Elizabeth Alstrom Saxer. I'm a registered nurse. I'm a case manager at the Northport VA Medical Center, Northport, Long Island, and I'm 61 years old. I graduated from Molloy College with a Bachelor's of Science in Nursing in 1980.
If you look at historical pictures of Molloy College during the 1970s, you will see how dramatically different it is from today's campus.
Well, at the time, Molloy College was a small women's liberal arts college, primarily known for nursing and teaching. And I guess I had about 300 students in my class. It was a small women's college. At the time, the campus was only 3 buildings. Kellenberg Hall, which was our academic, all our classes were there. The convent where many of the sisters lived was Maria Regina, and that was another building on campus. And then Quealy Hall was where our gymnasium and some music studios were there, and that was pretty much it. That was the entire campus.
Of course, with recent food incidents happening in the Anselma room, I decided to ask my mother what the food situation was like during her time on campus.
Molloy College, when I went there from 1976 to 1980, was a commuter college. So we all either brown bagged it or we got sandwiches or soda coffee from the cafeteria. I honestly couldn't tell you too much about it because it really was, it wasn't a dining hall the way it is now where there's resident life and the students are living on the campus. I also remember there was a pub which was called Mr. Thirsty's. I think it's now called Radigan's. Once in a while we would take a walk down there for a hamburger or something, but primarily it was a lot of brown bagging back in the day.
Of course, besides academics, my mom was a great volunteer as well as a talented guitarist. She always said my gift came from God, as well as her.
When I was at Molloy, I got involved in various activities. One of the things I particularly remember being involved in was the Gaelic Society. My friend had formed the Gaelic Society, was the initial club run. We actually were the first Molloy students to march in the New York City St. Patrick's Day Parade in 1979, and that was a great honor. I did a lot of singing and guitar playing. We had a folk mass group. I was involved in student government. I played a lot of tennis. And I guess that was it. Most of my focus was on academics.
During my time so far, I've come to the opinion that campus can become dull at night. So I decided to ask my mom if the campus was at all vibrant in the evening.
Well, they did have dances, which they called mixers. And I remember, because Molloy was an all-women's college, so they would have these dances with the guys from Kings Point, the Merchant Marine Academy, and that was fun. Live bands, they had them a couple of times a year. I remember on Friday afternoons they used to have like beer and sandwiches in the Anselma room, because remember the drinking age back then was 18. And we were all 18 in college, but it was really not a vibrant sort of nightlife because, again, it was a commuter school and most of us had jobs. So you went to college, you went to your job, and you lived at home. We had Halloween parties, Christmas parties, things like that, concerts, but I wouldn't say it was a vibrant campus nightlife because no one lived there.
During my mom's time at Molloy, many historical events occurred, such as the founding of Apple Incorporated.
So in 1976, when I started Molloy College, it was the bicentennial. Really, computers were only in their infancy. So even those of us that were lucky enough to have an electric typewriter, no one had a computer. Nothing was web-based. There were no computers at the college. They may have had word processing units to store things like grades and programs, but really none of us, there were no laptops. There were no cell phones. Believe it or not, we used to line up in the basement if we wanted to use the one payphone that was in the lower level of Kellenberg.
The election of Jimmy Carter and a subsequent gas crisis.
There was a terrible gasoline shortage one year that affected everyone because we had to put odd even license plates on our cars, and it was a big deal because it was a commuter college. So every girl who went to Molloy back then had a car, or whether it was a borrowed car or they owned the car. So the gas shortage, I remember that being a big deal.
The opening of Star Wars.
Well, I remember going to see Star Wars with my boyfriend and realizing it was going to be big. And then I remember going again to see it a second time with my two younger brothers because I was the oldest and I was the driver. And we went to see it, and I remember us all enjoying that very much. And actually, a movie at the time that came out, which was really crazy popular on campus, was Grease. And that was John Travolta's movie, and we as a college full of girls, all went crazy. Everybody went to see Grease several times.
The New York City blackout of 1977.
The blackout of 77, well, that happened in the summertime. We were out of college, but I remember very clearly what that was like. We lived in Queens. Of course, no one had any generators, and it was truly pitch dark with the candles and flashlights. And I believe it was hot because I remember we were lucky enough to have some air conditioning in the home I grew up in, and of course there was no air conditioning. So I remember the heat. I remember a lot of people's food spoiled in the refrigerator. There was several cases of food poisoning among people that I knew because they had eaten things that hadn't been properly refrigerated.
The Iran hostage crisis.
Well, that was a very big deal because we were all young people ourselves. Of course, that was just a national nightmare. Again, most of our news was received at home, watching televisions in our homes because we were not living on the campus. So while I remember there being some talk about it and, some of the professors mentioning it on an ongoing basis in the class, I think it was like any other national news that wasn't happening right in our backyard. So while we were updated about it, it didn't really affect our classes or the day-to-day running of the college.
And the murder of John Lennon.
Well, I remember that was a very big deal because who didn't know and love the Beatles?
Smith is on the line, and I don't care what's on the line, Howard, you have got to say what we know in the booth.
Yes, we have to say it. Remember, this is just a football game, no matter who wins or loses. An unspeakable tragedy confirmed to us by ABC News in New York City. John Lennon, outside of his apartment building on the west side of New York City, the most famous perhaps of all of the Beatles, shot twice in the back, rushed to Roosevelt Hospital, dead on arrival.
I myself played a lot of guitar, played a lot of folk music, and I was quite familiar with a lot of John Lennon's music. And I remember thinking it awful that someone could be murdered right outside his own home. And it did affect the mood of the students in campus. I mean, it was a great loss.
Of course, like most students, my mother commuted every day, and just like other students, had to deal with the terrible parking. So I decided to ask her if she had any troubles over the years with either of those.
Well, when I went to Molloy College, my family lived in Queens Village, which was about a 20 to 30-minute commute on the Cross Island Parkway and the Southern State Parkway, which, believe it or not, had a toll booth at exit 13 at the time that has long been taken down. In fact, it was taken down while I was still in college. The commute for me was very easy. I had a car. I was fortunate enough my family was able to get me a car. Parking was never a problem. Again, the school was not as big as it is now. In fact, over where the Hayes building is, the Wilbur Hayes, I think we had about 10 tennis courts. Remember, it was a girls' college. So we had an equestrian team, not that I was on it, but we did. We had tennis was very, very big. But we never had a problem parking. There seemed to be enough spaces. I think also it was if you got there early, and again, the nursing students were there early and stayed late, so the earlier you got there, I'm sure people maybe that showed up at 11 or 12 couldn't park. We never had a problem. I never had a problem.
Of course, today, the class sizes are much larger than they used to be, so I decided to ask her how large they were back then.
The nursing classes were full. I mean, we would have had in a class for the nursing, upper division nursing classes. For the gen ed classes, again, class size might have been 30 to 40 students. I remember having a few classes. I took a lot of theology and philosophy, and I remember some of those classes had maybe 10 or 12 students in them. I had a communication class that had about 10 students in, but most of my classes were the core nursing requirements and then upper division nursing, and that was a very popular major, so the classes were pretty full.
Of course, the nursing program has dramatically changed since her time, but she still visits the Hagen Center whenever she comes by. So I asked her opinions on the state of the nursing program.
Of course, when I started nursing in 1976 at Molloy, the model in the nursing community was switching from the hospital-based nursing programs to the college and university-based programs. We had a heavy emphasis on book learning. We didn't begin our clinical practicum until our junior year. Now, what they do at Molloy now with that amazing Hagen Center, I believe the students start their clinical practicum in their second year. Certainly the hands-on, the laboratories, the mannequins, the program that Molloy has now is unbelievable. I mean, we had a small, sort of like a classroom with 3 hospital beds that was our skills lab. While the program at the time was excellent when I went, I can't even imagine how well prepared and well trained the students are now coming out of Molloy.
Before we finished recording, she had a surprise. She still had her nurse's cap from her freshman year and really wanted to talk about it. Not wanting to disappoint, I happily kept recording for her to talk about it.
One of the things we were proudest of when we started our junior year at Molloy was being able to go into the hospital setting in our professional whites, which consisted of a white dress or white pantsuit, white shoes, stockings or hose, and of course our hat, cap. At the time, registered nurses all wore caps. Each school of nursing, each college, university of nursing had their own individual cap that distinguished them along with their school pin, which I have. I also have a Molloy school ring, which we received when we were juniors. Now the cap, at the end of our junior year, we all got a pink stripe, and then when we finished and graduated and got our RN, a black stripe was added. And it sort of felt like a military distinction. So of course, the hats are now obsolete. They're no longer worn in the clinical setting, which I think is great because a lot of them were infection control problems if they fell off or became contaminated. And as hats in society in general sort of fell out of fashion, the nurse's cap also went that way. Most nurses now in the clinical settings wear scrubs. My mom was just a patient at Winthrop. I noticed the registered nurses all in navy blue scrub pants with white scrub type shirts with their names personalized on the uniforms. A very professional look. And as you can see, I still proudly have my Molloy cap.
Finally, she was one step ahead of me by asking if she could give a closing statement for the current students as well as Molloy as a whole. Take it away, Mom.
I would like to say that I am and always have been very, very proud to be a Molloy graduate. The Dominican tradition still thrives there, which I'm thrilled to see. My youngest son is now a student there and not studying nursing. But it was a wonderful 4 years of my life. I have always loved the fact that I went to Molloy. I still have many ties to Molloy and am very proud to be a Molloy graduate.